Welcome to the Cardboard Crash Course. My name's Ethan, and today we're talking about the Universities of Jol-Nar. This is a faction from the Twilight Imperium 4th edition base game, and upgraded by the Prophecy of Kings expansion. This will be both a component overview as well as an in-depth guide later, so stick around for that. If you're returning, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, as it helps out more than you know. If you really love these videos, check out my Patreon. Just $5 a month helps me out so much and brings these videos back to you. And you can even win things, like Twilight Inscription that's going on right now. Without further ado, let's check out the Jol-Nar. The Universities of Jol-Nar represent the highest headmaster and his individual scholars of the planets of Jol and Nar. This is a race called the Hylar, and consists of an incredibly intellectual combination of creatures determined to create the strongest technology in the universe. Although they are physically weak, their brains are the most powerful of any species known to the galaxy. Before the Twilight Wars, they created many technologies that every race, including the Lazax, used for their own gain. Now, after the Twilight Wars had shut them out into their own system, and they created their own war of aggression against the other races of the galaxy, they believe that they have the right to sit on Mechatol Rex as their technology prevails, and all other races merely have a remembrance, a fraction of what the Jol-Nar had once given them. As that technology begins to fade, the Jol-Nar rises back to power, and they are ready to push forward with their own aggressive units across the galaxy. So, that being said, they do start on two neighboring planets that orbit each other, Jol and Nar. The first, Jol, is a 1 resource and 2 influence planet, and the second one, Nar, is a 2 resource and 3 influence planet. So, in total, it comes out to a 3-5, which isn't too bad, but the fact that it's split into 2 separate planets is a slight bit scary. They also start off with a plethora of surprisingly powerful starting units, with a Dreadnought, 2 carriers, 1 fighter, 2 infantry, a space dock, and 2 PDS. So, as we can see right away, they do highly rely on their powerful units to protect themselves. They don't actually have many people to their name, and the infantry are kind of lacking in this regard. It's nice to have 2 carriers, but we will have to cross that hurdle of only having 2 pretty early on. They also start with 4 different technologies, the only race to do so. These are the 4 different no prerequisite technologies of the base game, starting with Neural Motivator. This is the green one that says, during the status phase, draw 2 action cards instead of 1. We also have Animass Deflectors, the blue one, that says your ships can move into and through asteroid fields. When other players' units use Space Cannon against your units, apply -1 to the result of each die roll. Sarween Tools, the yellow technology, comes next. When 1 or more of your units use Production, reduce the Gamine cost of the produced units by 1. And finally, we have the red one, Plasma Scoring. This says when 1 or more of your units use Bombardment or Space Cannon, one of those units may roll 1 additional die. Now, this is a fantastic little technology collection that we begin with, and really lets us go in any direction, perfect for the theme of the Jol-Nar. We also, of course, have the faction abilities here, pretty strong ones at that, although we do have a negative ability to begin. This ability is called Fragile, and says, apply -1 to the result of each of your unit's combat rolls. So this is the exact opposite of the Sardak Nor's ability, and also gives you a little reminder on each of your units. Pretty handy. The 2 really good abilities come next. First is Brilliant. It says when you spend a command token to resolve the secondary ability of the Technology Strategy card, you may instead resolve the primary ability. So normally, you'd only be able to do a worse version of that tech card, but with the Jol-Nar, whether or not you take it, when someone else uses it, you'll be able to benefit the most. And finally, we have Analytical. This says when you research a tech that is not a unit upgrade technology, you may ignore 1 prerequisite. So on top of all of the prerequisites that we already have to begin with, they can still ignore 1 every single time, as long as it doesn't upgrade one of their units. They also begin with 4 commodities, slightly more than the average, and that makes them a really good trade partner to have. Moving on to their flagship, we have the JNS Hylarim. It's an 8 cost, 6x2 combat, 1 movement, and 3 capacity flagship with sustained damage that says when making a combat roll for this ship, each result of 9 or 10 before applying modifiers produces 2 additional hits. So regardless of what you roll during combat, you also have a 20% chance of producing 2 additional hits, twice. This is actually an incredibly powerful flagship, especially being able to have that 3 capacity. Now, it's kind of nasty that they only have the 1 movement, but it actually comes in really handy in terms of battles. As you'll see, the Universities of Jol-Nar are much more physically stronger than you'd think, especially with all that technology they begin with. Moving on to their mech, as added in the Prophecy of Kings expansion, we have Shield Paling. This is a 2 cost and 6 combat value mech with sustained damage. This is standard, however, remember, if you roll a 6, it's actually a 5 and you would miss. It also has the ability, your infantry on this planet are not affected by your fragile faction ability. So the one that actually gives you -1, this still has that -1, but any infantry alongside it does not, which is kind of crazy, because they were already overpowered in the base game, and taking away their fragile ability is kind of their last step to become super powerful. But let's talk about that more in the analysis afterwards. Moving on to their faction techs. The first one is a 2 yellow prereq called E-Res Siphons. This is the more popular of the 2, I believe, at least in my games. It says, after another player activates a system that contains 1 or more of your ships, gain 4 trade goods. So, a defensive ability. This really doesn't come up too often, but the threat of it is even worse. Next up, we have Spatial Conduit Cylinder. It's a 2 blue prereq, and says you may exhaust this card after you activate a system that contains 1 or more of your units. That system is adjacent to all other systems that contain 1 or more of your units during this activation. This is basically a once per round massive Kraus ability that allows you to sort of wormhole your way around the board to exactly where you need. Quite powerful, actually. Finally added in the PoK expansion are some pretty powerful leaders, starting with the agent that begins the game unlocked, called Dr. Sukuban. This is the head of medical R&D, and allows you the once per round ability. When a player spends resources to research, you may exhaust this card to allow that player to remove any number of their infantry from the game board. For each unit removed, reduce the resources spent by 1. So, using this for yourself, you can pretty much pay for things utilizing your people. Sort of a sacrificial way. It's kind of sad. Next up, it is the Commander, Deep-Rot Visionary Tazern. It starts locked and unlocks when you own 8 technologies. That seems like a lot if you've never played the Jol-Nar. Trust me, it's not. When you do unlock it, you have the passive ability. After you roll dice for a unit ability, you may re-roll any of those dice. So that includes bombardment, anti-fighter barrage, and space cannon, not combat. And remember, those abilities aren't affected by fragile. So this is just buffing those up even more. Finally, we have the Perfected Being, Rin the Master's Legacy. This is the hero, and unlocks when you have 3 scored objectives, like all heroes. And then gives you the ability Genetic Memory. This is really fun. It's an action. For each non-unit upgrade tech you own, you may replace that technology with any technology of the same color from the deck. Then purge this card. I'll discuss how to best use that in a general sense in the analysis, but keep in mind this isn't just flashy, it can be quite powerful. And finally, we have the Promissory Note. This is what you would give away to another player, and they would use for themselves. It's called Research Agreement. After the Jol-Nar player researches a tech that is not a faction tech, gain that technology, then return this card to the Jol-Nar player. Wow, really powerful as well. Great little resource to give away. So that's all of their cards and abilities there. Let's go ahead and move over to the analysis. All right, the Jol-Nar. Well, right before I get into this, I would like to give a very special thank you to all of my patrons of the channel, especially the ones shown on screen here, the students and professors. All of you make these videos possible, and I would not be able to continue without you. Now, that being said, The analysis of the Jol-Nar is going to be an interesting one here. They are not bad in any sense. But I think it's important that we talk about their weaknesses right away, because they're not completely without them. Starting with their fragile faction ability. This is a very small weakness. The -1 doesn't do too much. It does decrease your chances of hitting by about 0.1 every time you roll. This is a significant detriment if rolled on a large scale, but doesn't really add up when you're rolling, 1 or 2 items at a time. And they should be able to fix themselves very quickly. Now this is the opposite of the Sardak Nor ability, and the fact that it's so small is kind of a testament to how small the buff is for the Nor. You shouldn't forget about it. You should definitely go in realizing that they are much less likely to actually hit than the opponent is. This is made up for by a lot of their units. They start with a Dreadnought, which is nice. It's not unheard of, but it's not what I would expect from the Jol-Nar, if I'm being honest. This is a combat value of 5, so it does hit on a 6 or greater, meaning that it gets decreased down to a 5, and allows them to have that protection of their home system right away, especially alongside those 2 PDS. Now, they don't only have the 2 infantry, and of course you're probably going to place those 2, 1 on each planet, but you shouldn't keep them on your home system too long. You should definitely take them along with the ride. But we're getting ahead of ourselves because that 2 infantry is a very strong weakness that they have, and is kind of one of their last. Because of this, they are only able to explore one system about in the very first round of the game. Now, most people would have a serious issue with this, but the fact that they start with 4 technologies cuts off the need for having a tech specialty for the most part, compared to most other factions. The main reason as to why a faction may want many infantry at the beginning of the game, of course, has to do with their exponential growth, but really has to do with 2 main things. Either utilizing warfare or some kind of warfare ability in order to get to Mechatol Rex first, such as the Soul or the Winnu. Or, number 2, to be able to grab onto those tech specialties and boost up their usage of the technology strategy card starting at round 1 and setting themselves up for an exponential growth that way. But of course, neither of those issues belong to the Jol-Nar. This is not a Mechatol Rex faction in my opinion. Giving a quick explanation as to why, that they can shoot ahead and score stage 2 public objectives much faster and much more reliably than anyone else. So they really should be relying on those. And because of the base game of TI4 as well as the Prophecy of Kings expansion, they still do have quite a few technology-related objectives in that deck. So you'll be able to consistently get those points throughout the whole game. They shouldn't really worry about Mechatol Rex because again, they don't have much force when it comes to pure combat, but I'll also talk for a moment as to how they can fix that. They should be going blue and red. Kind of ignore that green and yellow for now, and focus on those techs later in the game. They should push into AI development algorithm for the red. This is because they can upgrade a lot of their units to boost up past that fragile ability and create a more aggressive army than anybody else on the board can. And you can actually get very many more unit upgrades than a lot of other players are able to. This also allows you to create a sort of banking ability with that second ability of AI Dev. Because it can exhaust to allow you to actually produce those ships you've recently upgraded by the amount of unit upgrades technology owned, you're actually able to create cheaper ships than many other players at the table, even from round 1. Right after that, I would suggest pushing into self-assembly routines. Getting those mechs down on planets and taking away that one weakness that the infantry have and giving them back that +1 bonus is really powerful. And if you have those 2, combining it with a unit upgrade tech such as PDS-2 or even Dreadnought 2, and I'll talk about blues in a moment, you're able to really lock down that planet system. You're not going to lose things as the Jol-Nar as easily as you may think, and if people are actually able to invade, they no longer have that fragile ability on the infantry. So if you start with plasma scoring, take AI development algorithm, and then move into the self-assembly routines, it allows you to create a protective barrier similar to that of the Sardak Nor without actually being them. So what's the blue tech path you should be taking? Well, I have 3, just like red. You start with anti-mass deflectors, move into gravity drive, and then get fleet logistics. This allows you to take things with fleet logistics before anybody else may, and gravity drive to push through even asteroid fields or whatever, and get to either the edge of the game board or specific planets that you need for tech specialties or whatever, attachments and everything that objectives may need, and lock those objectives in place multiple turns ahead. You know what's in the objective deck, so keep all of that in mind and try to plan for all of it before they're revealed. How are you doing this though? How are you getting 6 different technologies? Well, because every round of the game, you're at very minimum going to be researching 2. Because of this, by round 3, you can hit those 3 of each color that I suggested, as well as 2 others. And what should those 2 others be? Well, utilizing both their brilliant as well as analytical faction abilities together, you're actually able to push past through at least 1 prerequisite, if not 2 if you have one from a planet. Now I think in this situation, it's not a bad idea to grab hypermetabolism, as they do sort of have a command counter problem, because they'll be utilizing warfare, construction, and trade for the most part. So hypermetabolism will definitely help out in the earlier rounds, and you're actually able to gain this from round 1, if you so desire. And if you do want to get an extra one, Sling Relay is not bad to specifically produce your flagship. Your flagship is one of, actually, it's the strongest in the game. Aside from War Suns, it actually produces the highest number of average hits. So create it and send it out where you need. Send it out where you need to protect things. Even though it does suffer from that fragile faction ability, it still provides 1.6 on average hits every time it rolls. This is very strong, as most flagships that are good, such as the Baronies, provide 1.2. This is exceptionally better, and you can really contest with some of the strongest races in the galaxy. So, what happens when those strong races start to push back? I suggest E-Res Siphons. E-Res Siphons is their faction technology that requires 2 yellow. You are allowed to take 4 trade goods from the supply whenever somebody activates your system. Not only are they possibly going to lose because of that strong military you've already created, but they're also decentivized to go in, because the Jol-Nar have so many technologies and resources and power to begin with. 4 trade goods is actually a huge deal. Their agent allows them to pay for the primary of the technology card, that's 6 resources that you need, with infantry. So you can sacrifice 2 infantry and use the 4 trade goods from this card in order to get a whole nother technology, which will only become so much more powerful utilizing their hero later. Someone will not want to trigger that, I promise you. And they may forget about it, but make sure to remind them before they come in. Spatial Conduit Cylinder is also not a bad technology, and really good if you have to have some kind of placement objective, but you have to get out there in the first place. Personally, I think Gravity Drive is just better and more consistent in this situation, but if you really need your flagship to be flown out or whatever, then it's not a bad idea, especially if you're moving into friendly territory. Now, your flagship isn't affected by the commander, but many of your other ships are, including the Dreadnought that you begin with. The commander is not a bad ability. A real quick note to keep in mind is that rolling and re-rolling are treated as 2 separate things in this game. It says after you roll the dice, you may re-roll the dice. This is not infinite. Make sure to keep that in mind, because I've had that problem come up before, and the last thing you want in a 10-hour game is to have to search through the rules every 5 minutes because you didn't watch your faction guide. Now, it's a good ability, but what's funny is I don't really even think they needed it, because those abilities are not affected by the fragile detriment there. Only combat rolls are. So it's just kind of a buff that's unnecessary for them and makes them that much better. A quick side note extension. A first-time player may look at this faction and think they are incredibly inconsistent because they rely a lot on those weak die rolls. This is false. They may begin inconsistent, especially with their ability to take planets, but I would say by mid-game, they are the most consistent, the most reliable faction in the entire game. At least one of them. Maybe second to the Titans, or Sol, or Hakan, but even then, it's really pushing it. Now, the final thing that I wanted to touch on in terms of quick faction guide analysis is their hero. This is a flashy hero, I know. But keep two things in mind when using it, two very important points. Number one, it says you cannot change a unit upgrade tech into a non-unit upgrade tech, but you can go the other way. You can instantly research exactly what unit upgrade you need and exactly what you've built in a situation that you need it. You can pop your hero and all of a sudden create Dreadnought 2 where you may have 2 or 3 Dreadnoughts protecting a system. This really throws people off. The second note is that you don't have to go up. Now, what I mean by that is you don't have to turn Neural Motivator into X89 Bacterial Weapon. That may just not be the technology that you need for the situation. What's funny about Twilight Imperium 4th Edition is higher and more expensive technologies that require more prerequisites aren't necessarily better. Never once have I thought to myself while using them, man, I really wish I had Lightwave Deflector instead of Dark Energy Tap or Gravity Drive. So if you're surrounding multiple blank deep space tiles and you think, man, all I need is a relic or some kind of, massive explosion that could really push me over the edge, or maybe an extra secret objective after that Codex 3, go ahead and turn your AMS deflectors into a Dark Energy Tap. Or hell, turn your Lightwave Deflector into a Dark Energy Tap. What is it doing for you in that situation? Make sure to keep all of the technology in front of you and always be planning ahead, because that hero changes the game for you, but it is not a flashy, immediate ability. People may not even really know what you're doing, and although you're supposed to tell them, I guarantee they won't remember all the techs that you turned into other techs. One thing I would suggest, however, is don't research Assault Cannon unless absolutely necessary. Use your hero for it. Because it can just come out of nowhere and surprise people, I would suggest turning that plasma scoring or whatever that you may have needed early game into the Assault Cannon and then moving in the turn after. Or if you have fleet logistics, using your hero, completely reworking your entire military and then moving in. This is especially important if you're going in for that rare Mechatol Rex strategy. So essentially, Jol-Nar are just really, really good and flexible. You have the power. The entire technology deck is in your hands. What will you do with it? What's fun about Twilight Imperium, especially the 4th edition, is that it's a storytelling game. This means that not every faction has to be or should be created equal. Some factions are simply just better. And some factions like the Jol-Nar, I know, may be banned at certain tournaments or whatever, but just playing with a casual group of friends and knowing that the Jol-Nar are out there with their immense flexibility and power just makes my Winu underdog story that much better. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your likes and comments and subscriptions to the channel. I try to respond to everybody, so please don't be offended if I can't get to you. If you want to talk directly to me, go ahead and join the Discord, but without further ado, have a great rest of your day. Pax Magnifica, Bellum Gloriosum.